My name is Vanessa, and at 33 years old, I never expected my own parents to use my deepest grief as a weapon against me. After my husband died, I became a single mom with little twins. My parents refused to help, but my in-laws welcomed us with open arms. Years later, I sold my horse ranch for $88 million. When my parents showed up, I revealed the gift for my in-laws, and their faces froze in shock. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Connecticut meant that maintaining a flawless image was the only religion my family ever truly practiced. My parents, Beatrice and Harrison Montgomery, demanded absolute unwavering excellence and strict conformity from absolutely everyone around them. Tonight, the formal dining room was a spectacular showcase of their immense wealth. The exceptionally long antique mahogany table groaned under the heavy weight of sparkling crystal wine glasses, perfectly polished silver platters, and a massive, beautifully roasted turkey that no one had even bothered to touch yet. Extended family members sat stiffly around the opulent room, afraid to speak. I sat near the far, quiet end of the extremely long table, feeling entirely out of place in my simple knitted sweater and practical faded jeans. My 6-year-old twins, Leo and Lily, were happily and quietly coloring in the adjoining sunroom, completely oblivious to the thick, heavy tension that was slowly suffocating the adults in the formal dining room. The air was heavy, with the kind of wealthy, polite hostility my family had spent decades perfecting. I truly wanted my children to know their extended family, so I naively hoped that the warm holiday spirit might finally bring a genuine moment of lasting peace and reconciliation. I was incredibly, sadly wrong. I was taking a slow, quiet sip of my ice water when my mother suddenly stood up abruptly at the head of the table. She reached deeply into her oversized designer leather handbag and aggressively pulled out a thick, incredibly intimidating stack of legal papers. Without a single word of warning, she walked briskly over to my specific seat and forcefully dropped a 20-page legal document directly onto my fragile dinner plate. The heavy, loud thud of the paper against the bone china echoed endlessly through the shockingly silent dining room. I looked down at the bold legal print and then slowly looked up at my mother. "I think it is finally time we put an end to this dirty little horse rescue hobby of yours, Vanessa," she announced, her voice ringing clear and sharp for every aunt and uncle to hear. "You are going to sign the ranch over to your brother Preston tonight so he can do something useful with it." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity and cruelty of her demand. The property she called a dirty little horse rescue was the sanctuary I had built with my bare hands after my husband Liam passed away. It was my livelihood. It was the only true home my children knew, and she wanted me to sign it away right before dessert. I calmly moved the heavy legal document off my plate and set it gently on the wooden table. "I am not signing anything, Mother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the rage boiling in my chest. "This is Thanksgiving dinner. Can we please just enjoy the meal and discuss business another time?" "Harrison," my father leaned forward from the opposite end of the table. "Do not speak to your mother that way, Vanessa," he demanded loudly. "We are trying to help you fix your life. You have been playing in the mud for years. It is time to join the real world," he continued. "Your brother has a legitimate corporate plan for that land." That was when Preston eagerly chimed in. At 36 years old, Preston was the undisputed golden child of the Montgomery family. He slid a heavy silver fountain pen across the mahogany table toward me. It rolled smoothly until it hit the base of my water glass with a sharp clink. "Come on," Vanessa, Preston said, leaning back in his chair like a wealthy king holding court among his loyal subjects. "I am doing you a massive financial favor here, little sister. I am offering you a $150,000 buyout for that miserable patch of dirt," Preston declared. "That is more than fair for a struggling single mother who is clearly drowning in debt and bad decisions." 5 years ago, my wonderful husband Liam, a beloved high school science teacher, died suddenly in a tragic, horrific car accident. His unexpected death left me utterly shattered and entirely alone with two one-year-old infants and a massive mountain of overwhelming medical and funeral debt. I had nowhere to turn and no way to support my young grieving family. In my absolute darkest hour, I had driven through a freezing winter blizzard to come to this very house, begging my parents for a temporary loan just to keep the lights on and feed my babies. They had coldly locked the heavy front doors and told me I needed to learn independence and stop relying on handouts. In the exact same breath, they had happily handed Preston a $200,000 check to fund a ridiculous tech startup that everyone in the industry knew was doomed to fail. Now Preston was sitting across from me using my tragedy as leverage to steal my land. "You are practically bankrupt, Vanessa," he continued, his tone dripping with fake mock pity that made the other guests nod in silent agreement. "We all know Liam left you with absolutely nothing but past due bills and those noisy twins. How are you even feeding them these days? You should be thanking me on your knees for giving you a clean way out. Take the $150,000, pay off your outstanding debts, and move into a small, cheap apartment in the city where you belong." The dining table remained dead silent, as his insults hung heavy in the warm holiday air. My aunts and uncles quickly looked away, staring intensely at their expensive crystal glasses, completely unwilling to challenge the golden child or anger my formidable parents. They were all complicit in this calculated ambush, waiting eagerly for me to break down and cry. But I did not cry. I did not drop my gaze to the polished floor. I simply picked up the heavy silver pen, slowly rolled it thoughtfully between my fingers, and looked directly fiercely into the eyes of my older brother. "The $150,000 is a very generous offer, Preston," I said, my voice ringing steady and clear across the silent room. "It is really too bad you are about 5 years too late to play the hero." I tossed the silver pen back across the wide table. "I am not signing your insulting contract because the property is no longer held under my personal name and it is absolutely no longer available for a private transfer to you or anyone else in this toxic family." Beatrice let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed off the high ceiling of the dining room. "Oh, please do not tell me the bank foreclosed on that dirt patch," she sneered. "I knew you would lose it. You never had business sense. You should have let us handle things. Now you have nothing and have ruined the future of your children." I stood up from my chair, slowly smoothing my sweater. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of cardstock. It was a premium embossed business card. I dropped it on top of the legal contract of Preston. "Actually, Mother, the bank did not foreclose on the ranch," I said. "That is the business card for the lead acquisition director of a premier international corporate development firm. They took over the deed to the property this morning." Preston snatched the card off the table, his smirk vanishing instantly as he read the prestigious company name printed on the front. The color drained from his face, and he looked terrified of what I had accomplished without help. "What is this, Vanessa?" he stammered, his voice visibly shaking with sudden, undeniable panic. "What did you do to the family property?" I looked quietly at my parents, and then at my trembling brother. "I did exactly what you all told me to do 5 years ago when I was freezing and crying in your driveway," I said, walking toward the dining room door to collect my children. "I learned exactly how to be independent. Enjoy your dry holiday turkey." The biting November wind whipped across the pristine driveway as I hurried Leo and Lily toward my battered station wagon. I had barely managed to bundle them into their winter coats when the heavy oak front door of my parents' estate slammed open against the brick exterior. Preston marched down the grand limestone steps. His expensive Italian leather shoes clicked sharply against the freezing pavement. He did not care that my children were standing right there holding my hands. He marched straight up to my car and slammed his hand flat against the driver's side door just as I reached for the handle. You think a piece of shiny cardboard makes you a player in the real world?" "Vanessa," he spat, his breath plumed in the freezing air. "You think you can just walk into this house, disrespect our mother, and walk out with some fantasy about selling that miserable dirt patch to a corporate firm? You are delusional. I gently nudged Leo and Lily into the back seat and securely closed their door, shielding them from his rising voice. I turned to face my brother. I am not playing any games, Preston. I secured a legitimate buyer for my property. Now move your hands so I can take my children home. He leaned closer, his face contorted with a mixture of arrogance and absolute rage. You do not have a home. You live in a barn attached to a failing petting zoo. You are a financially unstable widow who cannot even afford decent clothes for a holiday dinner. If you walk away from my buyout offer tonight, I will make one phone call tomorrow morning. I will call Child Protective Services. I will tell them you are an unfit mother drowning in debt and completely incapable of providing a safe environment for those twins. They will take Leo and Lily away from you before the weekend is over. The threat was designed to break me, to send me dropping to my knees in panic. He expected me to cry and beg for his mercy. Instead, the freezing wind howling across the manicured lawn triggered a visceral memory that hit me harder than his empty threats ever could. I stared at the icy driveway beneath my boots, and suddenly, I was no longer 33 years old standing in a light autumn chill. I was 28. It was 5 years ago, on the night of the funeral for my husband Liam. The worst blizzard of the decade had buried the city in feet of snow. Liam had died suddenly when a drunk driver ran a red light, leaving me entirely alone with two one-year-old infants. He was a beloved high school science teacher who spent his life helping others, but his modest life insurance policy barely covered the hospital trauma unit fees and the cost of his casket. I had absolutely nothing left. My bank account was overdrawn. I had no money for rent, and I had no money to buy formula for my crying babies. Desperate and completely terrified, I had driven my failing car through the blinding snowstorm to this exact driveway. I trudged up those exact limestone steps with snow soaking through my cheap boots. I banged on the heavy mahogany front door until my knuckles bled. My parents opened the door just a few inches. The warm golden light from their grand foyer spilled out into the freezing storm, illuminating my tear-stained face. I begged them for a temporary loan. Just a few $1,000s, I pleaded, just enough to keep the heat on in our tiny apartment and buy groceries until I could find a second job. I promised to pay them back every single cent with interest. I told them their grandchildren were freezing. My father, Harrison, stood tall and completely unbothered in his tailored evening jacket. He looked down at me as if I were a stranger asking for spare change on a street corner. "You need to learn independence, Vanessa," he stated coldly. "Bailing you out of your poor life choices will not teach you how to survive in the real world." Liam was a nice boy, but he had no financial foresight. You chose that life. Now you must manage it. My mother, Beatrice, stood right beside him wearing a sparkling diamond necklace and a serene expression. She slowly pushed the heavy door closed. But before the latch clicked shut, I saw Preston standing in the warm hallway behind them. He was holding a piece of paper. It was a check for $200,000. My parents had just cheerfully handed him a massive fortune to fund his ridiculous tech startup. They gave him hundreds of thousands of dollars for an app that everyone in the industry knew would fail. Meanwhile, they locked their grieving widowed daughter out in a deadly blizzard to learn independence. Preston had smiled at me through the closing door 5 years ago, with the exact same arrogant smirk he was wearing right now. His startup collapsed 6 months later, burning through every penny of that money. He faced zero consequences. I went home that night and fed my babies watered-down oatmeal while wearing 2 winter coats. I survived. I built a life out of the ashes they left me in. I wiped the memory away and pulled my focus back to the present moment. I looked at Preston and I felt absolutely nothing but cold, hard clarity. "You are completely pathetic, Preston," I said. My voice was eerily calm, cutting through the crisp night air. "Call them. Call Child Protective Services tomorrow morning. Tell them whatever lies you want to invent. Because when they arrive at my property, they will find a fully operational, highly profitable equine therapy center. They will find 2 healthy, happy children who attend a premier elementary school. They will find that my business carries zero debt. They will see that I am an incredibly capable mother who built a successful sanctuary with her own bare hands. Your threats mean absolutely nothing to me anymore. Preston did not flinch. He did not back down or show any signs of defeat. Instead, his cruel smirk widened into a sinister grin that made my stomach tighten. He reached into the inner pocket of his expensive designer suit jacket and slowly pulled out his smartphone. "Zero debt," he asked, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "Are you absolutely certain about that, Vanessa? Because I think you might have missed a very important piece of mail." He tapped the glowing screen of his phone a few times and then forcefully shoved the device directly into my face. I squinted against the harsh bright light of the screen. It was a digital scan of an official legal document. My eyes scanned the bold black text at the top of the page. It was a property lien filed directly against my horse ranch. The document bore the official seal of the county clerk office and the distinct signature of the premier corporate law firm that represented my father. I read the details rapidly, trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the betrayal staring back at me. The lien claimed that I owed a massive outstanding balance on a fabricated family loan. They had somehow manufactured a legal claim asserting that the initial startup costs for my rescue ranch were funded by a personal loan from Harrison and Beatrice Sterling. It was a complete and utter lie. My parents had never given me a single dime. Every nail I bought, every bale of hay I purchased, and every veterinary bill I paid had been funded by my own blood, sweat, and tears. But the corporate lawyers my father employed were ruthless and incredibly skilled at creating airtight legal fictions. They had buried the fabricated debt under layers of complex legal jargon and forged agreements that looked terrifyingly legitimate to the untrained eye. "You see," Vanessa, Preston sneered, lowering the phone but keeping his triumphant gaze locked on mine, "you do not own your property free and clear. Our father placed this lien on your dirt patch 3 days ago, the second we found out those developers were sniffing around your side of town. We knew you would try to cash out and run. But you cannot sell a single blade of grass without a clear title." I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my heart rate to remain steady. "You fabricated a debt," I stated plainly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me panic. "I will take this to court. I will hire a forensic accountant to tear your fake documents apart. I will prove to a judge that I never received a single penny from this family." Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed across the vast, empty driveway. "Oh, you could definitely fight it in court," he agreed, slipping his phone back. "But you will be bankrupt long before you ever see the inside of a courtroom." Preston continued, his breath curling into a white cloud of absolute malice. "By the time a judge even looks at your paperwork, those developers will be long gone. You have until Monday, Vanessa. Pay the $500,000 or sign the property over to me for the buyout. Otherwise, you lose it all to the bank anyway. Enjoy the drive home in that piece of junk." He turned his back on me and confidently marched up the grand limestone steps, disappearing back into the warm, glowing fortress of our parents. I did not waste another second looking at that house. I got into my freezing car, started the sputtering engine, and drove away from the sprawling Montgomery estate. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The heater in my car barely worked, but the cold inside the vehicle was absolutely nothing compared to the icy cruelty of my own blood relatives. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Leo and Lily fast asleep, their small heads resting against each other. I had to protect them. I had to fight. 20 minutes later, the massive iron gates and manicured lawns of my childhood neighborhood faded into the modest working-class streets of the city outskirts. I pulled into a cracked concrete driveway in front of a small single-story ranch house. The paint was peeling slightly around the window frames, but the porch light shone with a welcoming yellow glow. This was the home of George and Helen, my late husband Liam's parents. This was my true sanctuary. I unbuckled the sleeping twins, carried them inside one by one, and gently tucked them into the spare bedroom. When I walked into the narrow living room, George was sitting in a worn recliner. He looked up and offered a warm, genuine smile that instantly made the knot in my chest loosen. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted chicken, a sharp contrast to the sterile, catered perfection of my parents' dining room. Helen lay on the floral sofa wrapped in a thick quilt. Her skin was pale and her breathing sounded incredibly shallow. A sudden harsh cough shook her frail frame. I hurried over to her side and knelt on the worn carpet, pulling her warm hand into mine. "You should not be out in this terrible weather, Vanessa," Helen whispered, her voice weak but full of boundless affection. "The roads are freezing over." "We are perfectly fine, Helen," I assured her softly, brushing a gray strand of hair from her forehead. "How are you feeling tonight? Did the doctor call back about the surgery schedule?" George stood up and walked over, resting his heavy, calloused hand on my shoulder. "The hospital called this afternoon," he said, his voice thick with suppressed worry. "They cannot schedule the operation until we provide a massive upfront payment. The insurance simply will not cover the out-of-network specialist she desperately needs. We are looking at second mortgages, but the bank is dragging its feet." Anger flared hot and bright in my veins. Not at George and Helen, but at the fundamental injustice of the world. 5 years ago, when my own parents locked me out in a blizzard, it was George and Helen who threw open their doors. They did not have wealth or connections. They were a retired mechanic and a public school cafeteria worker. But when they saw me shivering with 2 infants, they did not hesitate for a single second. They sat me down at this very kitchen table and made a decision that saved my life. They completely drained their entire retirement savings. They took every single penny of the meager 401k they had spent 40 years building and bought me that overgrown, abandoned plot of land on the edge of town. They bought the dirt patch my mother mocked so I could have a place to live and a chance to build a future for their grandchildren. They sacrificed their golden years for my survival. Now Helen was fighting a severe cardiac condition, and the medical bills were piling up faster than we could ever manage. The surgery she needed to save her life cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They had given me everything they had, and now they had nothing left to save themselves. "Do not call the bank, George," I said, looking up at him with absolute fierce determination. "I told you I am handling this. You are not taking out a second mortgage. You are not losing this house. The money is coming. I promise you both the money is coming this week." Helen offered a weak, doubtful smile, squeezing my fingers. "Oh, honey, you do not need to worry about us," she murmured. "Focus on the twins. We will find a way. We always do." I stood up and kissed her cheek. "I am going to make sure you get the absolute best care in the state, Helen. I have to go meet with someone very important tomorrow morning, but I will be back to check on you. Just hold on a little longer." I left their warm house with a renewed, burning sense of purpose. Preston and my parents were not just threatening my financial independence. They were actively jeopardizing the life of the woman who had saved me. They were playing a dangerous, greedy game with time that Helen simply did not have. I would not let them win. I would tear their empire to the ground if it meant saving my true family. The next morning, the sky was a bleak, heavy gray as I walked into the sleek glass and steel building downtown. I rode the elevator to the 40th floor and stepped into the plush, modern offices of my attorney, Marcus Vance. Marcus was a sharp, aggressive lawyer who specialized in high-stakes corporate real estate. I had hired him the moment the international eco-resort developers approached me with their staggering offer. I bypassed his receptionist and walked straight into his corner office, tossing my heavy winter coat onto a leather chair. Marcus was sitting behind his massive glass desk, rubbing his temples. A thick stack of legal documents sat directly in front of him. He did not look happy. "Tell me you have a plan to destroy this fake lien," I demanded, sitting down opposite him. "Preston ambushed me last night. They manufactured a fake debt claiming my parents funded the ranch startup. They placed a hold on the title." Marcus dropped his hands and looked at me with grim, serious eyes. "It is worse than just a hold, Vanessa," he said, leaning forward. "I spent the entire night reviewing the filing. Your father used his top-tier corporate sharks. They buried this fabricated debt under layers of airtight, fraudulent corporate structures. To the legal eye, it looks like a completely valid massive default." I crossed my arms, refusing to let panic take hold. "So we fight it. We show the bank records. We prove they never gave me a dime." Marcus shook his head slowly. "We could absolutely prove it in court, Vanessa. We have the financial trail to completely destroy their claim. But litigation takes months. Sometimes it takes years to untangle a mess like this through the proper judicial channels, and we do not have months, we barely have hours. What do you mean? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Marcus turned his laptop screen toward me, displaying a stark formal email from the legal department of the eco resort developer. The buyers ran a final routine title check this morning in preparation for the closing, he explained, his voice tight. They found the lien. They are a publicly traded international conglomerate, Vanessa. They do not do messy acquisitions, and they absolutely do not buy properties embroiled in active family litigation. I stared at the screen, reading the cold corporate language. The words blurred together, but the final sentence was painfully clear. They issued an ultimatum. Marcus continued tapping the screen. They want this property for their flagship luxury resort, but they are not willing to wait for a protracted legal battle. They have given us exactly 72 hours. If that lien is not legally lifted and completely removed from the public record within 3 days, they are pulling their offer entirely. They will walk away from the deal and buy a different parcel of land out west. My breath caught in my throat. The $88 million deal was hanging by a thread. $88 million that meant freedom. $88 million that meant saving Helen, securing the future for Leo and Lily, and finally escaping the suffocating grip of my toxic biological family forever. Now it was all about to vanish because of a greedy, vindictive lie. If they pull the offer, I lose everything, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The property goes back to being just a patch of dirt. Helen does not get her surgery. Exactly, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. Your father and brother know exactly what they are doing. They timed this perfectly. They know you have a massive buyer lined up, and they are holding your land hostage. They expect you to panic and sign the ranch over to Preston for pennies just to escape the pressure. If you try to fight them in court, the 72-hour window closes, the corporate buyer walks away, and the massive fortune disappears forever. I stood up and began pacing the length of his office, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. I thought about Preston laughing in the freezing driveway. I thought about my mother dropping those legal papers on my plate like garbage. I thought about Helen coughing on that worn floral sofa. The rage I felt was no longer a hot, chaotic fire. It was a cold, sharp blade. There has to be a way to force them to drop it, I said, turning back to Marcus. What if I threaten them with criminal fraud charges? What if I go to the police? Marcus sighed heavily. They will just deny it and hide behind their lawyers. A criminal investigation will take even longer than civil litigation. The developers will not wait around for detectives to sort out family drama. You have to understand, Vanessa, the legal system cannot save this deal in 3 days. I walked back to the glass desk and placed my hands flat against the cool surface, looking directly into the eyes of my attorney. If the legal system takes too long to lift the lien, then we do not use the legal system. Marcus raised an eyebrow, looking intrigued but highly skeptical. What exactly are you suggesting? I am suggesting that we play their game, I said, my mind working furiously as the pieces of a plan began to snap into place. The only way to save the $88 million deal is to get the lien removed immediately. The only people who can authorize the immediate removal of that lien are my parents. They filed it. They can dissolve it. They will never voluntarily dissolve it, Marcus pointed out. They want the 80% cut, or they want the land for Preston. They have you backed into a corner. They only think they have me backed into a corner. I corrected, a fierce smile slowly forming on my face. They think I am a desperate, financially unstable widow who is absolutely terrified of losing a minor real estate deal. They think the buyer is only offering a few $100,000. They have absolutely no idea the land is actually worth $88 million. Marcus sat up straighter, resting his elbows on the desk. You want to con them. You want to trick them into signing the release form voluntarily. I am not conning anyone, Marcus, I replied, my voice dripping with cold determination. I am simply going to give them exactly what they want. I am going to offer my greedy, arrogant family a deal they cannot possibly refuse. They thrive on control and public humiliation. I will give them the ultimate stage to humiliate me. But by the time they realize what they have actually signed, the $88 million will already be in my bank account, and their entire toxic empire will be burnt to the ground. Marcus stared at me for a long, silent moment. He reached for a fresh legal pad and clicked his pen. Tell me exactly what we need to do. I left Marcus at his desk and drove directly to the exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club. My parents practically lived at this sprawling monument to old money and elitism. The young valet opened my car door with a poorly concealed look of disdain at my faded station wagon. I completely ignored him and walked through the heavy glass doors into the main dining room. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted prime rib. I spotted Harrison and Beatrice sitting at a prime window table, overlooking the meticulously manicured golf course. They were sipping mimosas and laughing softly together in sunlight. I approached their table, keeping my shoulders slumped and my eyes fixed on the plush carpet. I needed them to believe that they had completely broken my spirit. I pulled out a heavy wooden chair and sat down without waiting for an invitation. Harrison set his crystal glass down and looked at me with immense satisfaction. He wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. Beatrice smiled a slow, triumphant smile that chilled my blood. She adjusted the massive diamond ring on her left hand, making absolutely sure the sunlight caught the sparkling, expensive stone. I see you finally decided to join the real world, Vanessa, my father said, his voice dripping with condescending authority. Have you come to your senses and realized that fighting us is completely pointless? I stared at the pristine white tablecloth and forced my voice to tremble just slightly. You win, I said quietly, allowing a heavy note of utter defeat to color my spoken words. The developers gave me a strict deadline. If I do not have a clear title by Monday morning, they are pulling their entire offer. I will lose the sale and everything I have built. Beatrice let out a sharp, elegant laugh. Oh, you need us to lift the lien. That is very interesting, Vanessa. Yesterday you were parading around our dining room flashing business cards and acting like a billionaire real estate mogul. Today, you look exactly like the pathetic little girl who begged for handouts in the snow. I kept my head down, staring at my hands. I played the part of the crushed, desperate daughter perfectly. Please, I begged them softly. Helen is incredibly sick. She needs major surgery to save her life. If I lose this sale, we lose absolutely everything. I just need enough money from the developers to pay for her hospital bills. You can have whatever is left over. Harrison leaned forward, resting his thick forearms on the polished table. His eyes gleamed with raw, unchecked greed. We already know the specific terms of our forgiveness, Vanessa. We are not running a local charity. Your brother told us about those eco-resort developers. We know they buy up cheap land and throw a few $100,000 at desperate sellers like you. If you want that lien lifted by Monday, we demand exactly 80% of the deal. You can keep the leftover crumbs for your sick mother-in-law. 80%, I repeated, letting my voice crack with feigned shock. But that leaves me with almost nothing. That leaves you with exactly what you deserve, Beatrice snapped, taking a delicate sip of her cold mimosa. You should be immensely grateful we are allowing you to keep anything at all today. You owe this family for the immense embarrassment you have constantly caused us over the years. Do you have any idea the immense financial stress we are currently under right now? Preston is facing massive, unmanageable obstacles. We need capital immediately, Beatrice complained, waving her perfectly manicured hand. I looked up at her, maintaining my fearful expression, but my mind was working at lightning speed. Obstacles, I asked softly. What kind of obstacles? Beatrice sighed loudly, rolling her eyes as if I were too incredibly dense to understand basic high finance. Preston had some bad luck with his latest investments, she complained, waving her hand dismissively again. He borrowed a significant amount of capital from some very aggressive private creditors. They are demanding immediate repayment, and their collection methods are highly uncivilized and completely terrifying for us. They showed up at our estate yesterday, making horrendous threats against your brother and our family business. Harrison quickly placed his hand over her wrist. shooting her a sharp, dark warning look. Beatrice, that is family business, he hissed through clenched teeth. She does not need to know the specific details of our financial strategies. But Beatrice was far too arrogant and far too comfortable in her perceived position of absolute power to stop talking. Oh, Harrison, what does it matter? She scoffed, pulling her hand away. She is about to hand over her land money to us anyway today. It is not like she can do anything about it. Preston owes $7 million, Vanessa, to very dangerous underground criminal organizations. We had to heavily leverage our own mansion just to keep the bank off his back, while we secure fresh liquid assets. If we do not pay those creditors by the end of next week, your precious brother is going to federal prison. The world seemed to slow down completely around me. I stared at my mother, absolutely stunned by the sheer magnitude of her careless, arrogant confession. The invincible Montgomery Empire was secretly, entirely, totally bankrupt overnight. Preston was not a successful entrepreneur at all. He was a desperate criminal drowning in millions of dollars of illicit debt. They did not just want my money out of petty spite or basic greed. They were facing total, absolute financial ruin and severe public social destruction. They needed my little buyout money desperately to keep their perfect son out of a cold, concrete jail cell. They assumed the developers were paying me exactly $500,000. They literally had absolutely no idea the actual purchase price was an astounding $88 million. I smiled extremely wide inside. I had them exactly where I wanted them. Their utter desperation was the perfect trap. I looked at Harrison, pretending to wipe away a stray tear. I cannot give you 80% of the corporate deal, I said, my voice dropping to a panicked whisper. The contract is too complicated, and the developers will never agree to redirect the funds to a third party at the last minute. The deal will collapse completely. Harrison slammed his massive fist onto the table, rattling the fragile crystal glassware. Then you figure it out, he demanded, his face turning red with sudden anger. We are not lifting that lien until we have a guaranteed massive payout. I took a slow, shaky breath, playing my final brilliant card. What if I just give the land directly to Preston, I suggested, looking back and forth between them carefully. What if we do exactly what you demanded at Thanksgiving dinner? My parents froze completely. Beatrice slowly lowered her glass, staring at me with sudden, intense, burning interest. What are you saying? She asked suspiciously. I am saying I am completely exhausted, I replied, leaning back in the heavy wooden chair. I cannot fight you anymore today. I just want out entirely. You want the ranch for Preston so he can sell it to the developers himself. Fine. I will sign the entire property deed over to Preston directly today. Harrison narrowed his dark eyes, scrutinizing my face for any sign of deception. Why would you suddenly give up the land to your brother? He asked, his deep voice dripping with intense, dark suspicion. Because I am totally out of options, I said, letting a single real tear fall for the sake of the performance. Helen is dying right now. I need cash right this very second. I cannot wait for the corporate deal to close next month anymore. I will sign the entire ranch over to Preston tomorrow, but he has to pay me $250,000 in cash immediately. Give me the $250,000 to save Helen, and Preston can take the land and sell it to the developers. He can keep all the profit to pay off his dangerous creditors entirely. $250,000 is a lot of money, Vanessa, my father said, pretending to hesitate to artificially secure his dominant, powerful negotiating position today. But considering the extreme circumstances, we can arrange a check by tomorrow afternoon. I kept my expression entirely flat, locking my hands together securely in my lap, completely still. I will have my attorney draft the property transfer documents tonight, I said calmly. But I have one absolute strict condition. Beatrice rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly. You are in absolutely no position to make demands here, Vanessa. This is completely non-negotiable, I stated firmly. I will give Preston the land for $250,000 only if Beatrice physically signs the lien release at the exact same time. Beatrice slammed her crystal mimosa glass onto the table. The sharp crack echoed through the elegant dining room, drawing the eyes of nearby wealthy country club patrons. "You demand my signature," she hissed. "You ungrateful little wretch. I will not be ordered around by a failed daughter who cannot even keep her own bank account in the black." Beatrice Harrison interrupted sharply. He placed a heavy hand on her wrist, silencing her instantly. He looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, measuring the weight of my desperation against his own impending ruin. "Fine. You will have your $250,000 check, and Beatrice will sign the release. But this happens exactly on our strict terms." "Draw up the papers," Vanessa Harrison ordered, dismissing me with a flick of his hand. "We will be in touch tomorrow to finalize the location. Do not attempt any tricks." I stood up from the heavy wooden chair, smoothing my coat. "No tricks," I said quietly, keeping my eyes lowered. "I just want this over with." I walked out of the country club, leaving them to their desperate delusions of victory. My heart pounded a fierce, triumphant rhythm against my ribs. The trap was set. Now I just needed to secure the final legal documents with Marcus. The next afternoon, I was sitting in my attorney office finalizing the irrevocable trust for George and Helen when my cell phone vibrated violently against the glass desk. The caller ID flashed the name of my father-in-law. A cold spike of dread instantly pierced my stomach. George never called me during working hours unless it was an absolute emergency. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "George, is everything okay? Is it Helen?" "Vanessa, you need to come home right now," George said. His voice, usually a steady, comforting rumble, was shaking with an explosive mixture of raw anger and absolute terror. "Your brother was just here. Helen is not doing well. Her breathing is terrible and her chest pains are back." I bolted upright, knocking my chair backward. Preston was there. "I am on my way." I sprinted out of the law firm, ignoring Marcus calling after me. I drove recklessly through the city traffic, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Preston had crossed a line I never thought he would dare to cross. He had brought his toxic poison directly to the only safe haven my children and I had left. When I threw open the front door of my in-laws' modest ranch house, the air inside was thick with tension and fear. Helen was lying flat on the floral sofa, clutching her chest. Her face was ashen, and her lips held a terrifying blue tint. George knelt beside her, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead, while Leo and Lily sat silently in the corner, their wide eyes filled with confusion and fright. "What happened?" I demanded, dropping my bag and rushing to the side of Helen. I grabbed her frail hand, checking her pulse. It was dangerously erratic. George stood up, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked in his cheek. "That arrogant suit-wearing snake showed up 10 minutes after you left for your meeting," George growled, pointing a trembling finger toward the front window. He kicked the front door open like he owned the place. He cornered Helen while I was in the kitchen. I felt the blood drain completely from my face. "What did he say to her, George?" "He told us you were trying to extort the family." George spat out, his voice shaking with protective fury. He threw a stack of legal papers on the coffee table. "He said unless you dropped your ridiculous demands and surrendered the ranch deed to him unconditionally by tonight, he was going to tie the land up in corporate litigation for the next 20 years. Helen let out a weak, ragged cough, clutching my hand tighter. "He said he would bury us in legal fees, Vanessa," she whispered, tears spilling down her pale cheeks. "He said he would make sure we lost this house. He told me I would die waiting for that surgery because he would freeze every single asset we had. He told the twins they were going to end up sleeping on the streets." A blinding white-hot rage exploded inside my brain. The $88 million deal suddenly felt like a secondary prize. Securing my financial freedom was no longer the ultimate goal. This was now a matter of absolute destruction. My brother had looked my dying mother-in-law in the eye and threatened her life. He had looked at my fatherless children and threatened them with homelessness. "What did you do, George?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain calm for the sake of the terrified children in the room. George straightened his spine, looking every bit the fierce protector who had saved me 5 years ago. I grabbed him by the lapels of his fancy jacket and dragged him out the front door, George said, his eyes blazing with fierce pride. I threw him off my porch. I told him if he ever stepped foot near my family again, I would not bother calling the police. I told him you were twice the woman his mother ever was, and that we would gladly lose this house before we ever let him bully you into submission. Tears pricked my eyes. This man who owed me nothing was willing to sacrifice his home and his wife to defend my honor. This was what true family looked like. They fought for you. They protected you. They did not use your grief as leverage. I called the doctor, Vanessa. George continued, his voice softening as he looked down at his wife. He wants to send an ambulance, but we cannot afford the admission fee right now. I gave her the emergency medication. We just have to keep her calm. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the private concierge number my new bank had provided when the $88 million escrow account was established. I turned away from the sofa so they would not hear the specific details of my conversation. "This is Vanessa Montgomery," I said, keeping my voice low and authoritative. "I need a private medical transport dispatched to my location immediately. I want the top cardiac specialist at Boston General on standby. Transfer whatever funds are necessary from the holding account to cover all upfront costs unconditionally." I ended the call and turned back to George and Helen. "An ambulance is coming," I said firmly. "Do not worry about the cost. I told you I am handling everything. The money is secured." George looked at me with deep, trusting eyes, but I could see the heavy toll the stress had taken on him. As we waited for the paramedics, I sat on the floor with Leo and Lily, holding them close and whispering that everything was going to be perfectly fine. But inside my mind, I was meticulously dismantling every single pillar of the Montgomery family empire. I was going to strip them of their wealth, their social standing, and their precious public image. I was going to leave them with absolutely nothing. The private medical transport arrived swiftly, taking Helen to the hospital with George by her side. I stayed behind to pack a bag for them and settle the twins with a trusted neighbor. Just as I zipped up the overnight bag, my cell phone rang. The screen displayed my mother calling, Beatrice. I let it ring 3 times, taking deep, calming breaths to ensure my voice would portray the perfect picture of a broken, defeated woman. I answered the call, holding the phone to my ear without speaking. Vanessa Beatrice snapped, her voice echoing with sharp, aristocratic authority. "Your brother just informed us of your little tantrum at his office. Or, should I say, your in-law's pathetic little shack. You are testing my patience." "He threatened my children, Mother," I said, forcing a slight tremor into my words. "He threatened Helen." He was merely explaining the harsh realities of corporate law to people who clearly do not understand how the real world operates, Beatrice dismissed callously. "Your father and I have decided to accept your desperate little proposal. We will give you the $250,000 to save that woman, and I will sign the lien release. But we are doing this our way." "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "We are not doing this in some dreary law office," Beatrice declared, her tone dripping with malicious glee. "Tomorrow night is the annual Entrepreneur of the Year charity gala downtown. Preston is receiving the keynote award. The entire city elite will be there. The mayor, the press, the investors, everyone who matters." She paused, letting the weight of her demands sink in. "You will bring the land transfer documents to the gala, Vanessa. We will set up a signing table directly on the main stage. Harrison will announce to the entire ballroom that the Montgomery family is generously stepping in to bail out our struggling widowed daughter. We will present you with the check publicly. You will sign the land over to Preston under the spotlights, and then I will sign your little lien release." My stomach turned at the sheer cruelty of her plan. She wanted to parade my fabricated failure in front of hundreds of wealthy socialites. She wanted to use my supposed bankruptcy as a prop to elevate Preston as a charitable savior. She wanted to publicly humiliate me one final time before casting me aside. It was the most diabolical, toxic demand she had ever made. And it was the absolute perfect stage for my revenge. "You want me to sign the papers on stage?" I asked, letting out a soft, convincing sob. "In front of everyone. Mother, please do not make me do that. It is too humiliating. Just let me come to the house." "You will do exactly as I say," Vanessa Beatrice commanded, her voice hardening into ice. "You want the money for that surgery. You want the lien gone. Then you will stand on that stage and you will smile while your brother saves you. If you do not show up tomorrow night with those documents, the deal is off completely. Preston will tie your land up in court until your in-laws are living in a cardboard box. I squeezed my eyes shut, visualizing the finalized $88 million contract currently sitting in a locked leather folder on the desk of my attorney. I visualized the irrevocable trust I had built for George and Helen. I visualized the dangerous creditors circling the family estate waiting for a payout that was never going to come. "Fine," I whispered, letting my voice break perfectly. "I will be there. I will bring the papers. Just please have the check ready." "Wear something decent," Beatrice sneered. "I will not have you embarrassing us in front of the press." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear, a cold, ruthless smile spreading across my face. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted an audience. They wanted the press, the cameras, and the spotlight to witness their ultimate triumph. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would give them a show the city would never, ever forget. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, ready to secure the final piece of the ultimate trap. I drove straight to the downtown financial district, pushing my battered station wagon as fast as the icy roads would safely allow. I had less than 30 hours before the gala, and the margin for error was absolutely zero. When I walked into the sprawling glass conference room at the law firm, Marcus was already sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table. Beside him sat 3 executives from the international eco-resort conglomerate. They wore impeccably tailored charcoal suits and expressions of extreme impatience. The lead developer, a sharp-featured woman named Victoria, tapped a silver pen against her legal pad. She did not bother with pleasantries when I took my seat. "We are pulling out at midnight tomorrow, Vanessa," she stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. "We have a backup property identified in Colorado. Your family drama is a liability. We do not invest $88 million in liabilities. We invest in clear titles and immediate groundbreaking." I looked directly into her cold eyes, refusing to be intimidated by her corporate posturing. "You will have your clear title tomorrow night during the primary keynote address of the local charity gala," I replied evenly. "My parents have agreed to sign the absolute release of the lien. They believe they are forcing me into a desperate corner. They have no idea you exist." Victoria stopped tapping her pen. Her sharp eyes narrowed slightly as she exchanged a quick glance with her colleagues. "You are orchestrating a public ambush," she asked, a hint of genuine professional respect cutting through her irritation. "I am executing a legally binding transfer of assets," I corrected smoothly. "I am giving them exactly the public spectacle they demanded." Marcus slid a thick stack of finalized contracts across the smooth mahogany table toward the developers. "The entire infrastructure of this transaction has been meticulously restructured overnight," he explained, tapping the top page. "We have established a high-priority digital escrow trigger. We will have a certified public notary and a digital filing clerk sitting by securely off-site tomorrow evening. The absolute second Beatrice Montgomery physical signature touches the lien release document, it will be scanned and transmitted. Once the county receives the digital filing, the title is instantly cleared." Victoria leaned forward, studying the documents with a predatory focus. "And the $88 million she asked?" "It is currently sitting in a heavily fortified holding account," Marcus answered. "The moment the county registry confirms the lien is dissolved, the algorithm automatically authorizes the wire transfer. The funds will move from your corporate holding directly into my client newly established accounts in less than 3 seconds. The transaction will be complete and legally irreversible before her family even poses for their next photograph." Victoria smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that perfectly mirrored the aggressive energy of the room. "I like your absolute ruthlessness, Vanessa," she murmured, signing her name with a sharp, aggressive flourish. "Ensure that lien is gone by tomorrow night or we walk." The developers packed their briefcases and exited the conference room, leaving Marcus and me completely alone. Marcus immediately pulled a second set of documents from his leather briefcase. The corporate buyout was only the first half of our survival strategy. The second half was ensuring that my biological family could never access a single dime of the new massive fortune, no matter what legal tactics they attempted to invent after the fact. I need you to review this incredibly carefully, Marcus said, sliding the new papers toward me. This is the absolute armor for your future. This is a fully sealed, airtight, irrevocable trust. The second the $88 million wire hits your account, the vast majority of the funds will immediately funnel directly into this protective structure. I picked up the heavy document, feeling the immense weight of my family future in my hands. I read through the specific terms we had discussed late last night. The primary medical beneficiaries were George and Helen. Their healthcare costs, surgeries, and long-term recovery care were completely covered in perpetuity. The secondary beneficiaries were Leo and Lily. Their education, housing, and absolute security were locked away behind impenetrable walls of premium legal protection. Harrison and Beatrice could hire an army of ruthless corporate lawyers, and they would still never breach the walls of this trust. It is completely bulletproof, Marcus assured me, pointing to the signature line. Even if they somehow attempt to sue you for fraud regarding the gala setup, they cannot touch these assets. You are legally relinquishing direct ownership of the capital the moment it arrives. You are merely the appointed executor. It belongs to your children and your in-laws now. I signed my name on the dotted line, pressing the pen down so hard it nearly tore through the thick parchment paper. A massive wave of profound relief washed over my chest. Helen was going to get her surgery. George was going to keep his house. My children were going to be safe forever. All that remained was the final execution of the trap. Let us prepare the folders, I said, looking up at Marcus. Marcus reached beneath his desk and brought out two identical midnight blue leather portfolios. They were pristine, heavy, and embossed with a subtle gold trim that looked perfectly suited for a high society charity gala. This is the visual trick, he explained, opening the first portfolio. This is the dummy folder. Inside this folder, we have placed the exact documents Preston and your parents are expecting. It contains a standard property transfer deed, signing the ranch over to Preston for $250,000. It also contains the official lien release form for Beatrice to sign. He closed the first folder and opened the second one. This is the live ammunition, he said, his voice dropping to a serious, tactical whisper. This folder contains the actual corporate buyout documents, the trust transfers, and the identical lien release form. Tomorrow night, you will carry both folders. You will present the dummy folder to your parents on the stage. You will let them read it. You will let them gloat. But when it is time to actually sign, you will create a momentary distraction and swap the portfolios. Beatrice must sign the lien release inside the live folder. I stared at the two identical blue leather squares, memorizing their exact weight and texture. I have a specialized hidden pocket built into my evening gown, I told him. I can easily swap them while Preston is giving his arrogant acceptance speech. He will be too busy soaking up the applause to notice a simple document swap. It has to be absolutely flawless, Vanessa, Marcus warned, gripping the edge of the table. If they realize what you are doing before she signs that release, they will tear the papers to pieces. I will not fail. I promised, picking up the live folder and securing it tightly against my chest. They taught me exactly how to be ruthless. Now they are going to experience their own bitter medicine. I thanked Marcus for his incredible dedication and walked out of the towering glass building into the freezing winter evening. The city streetlights flickered to life, casting long, dark shadows across the icy pavement. I unlocked my station wagon and tossed the heavy legal folders onto the passenger seat. I sat behind the steering wheel, taking a deep breath of the frigid air to steady my racing heart. We were so incredibly close. Just 24 hours stood between me and absolute total freedom. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently inside my coat pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from George regarding Helen's medical condition at the hospital. Instead, the screen displayed an anonymous, unlisted number. I opened the message and my blood instantly ran completely cold. It was not a message of text. It was a high-resolution photograph. The image showed the private arrival terminal of the local municipal airport. Four massive, heavily built men wearing thick leather jackets and dark sunglasses were stepping out of a sleek black SUV. Their faces were grim, aggressive, and violently determined. Beneath the photograph, a single terrifying sentence glowed on my screen. The clock just ran out for the golden boy. Preston highly dangerous underground creditors had not waited until the end of the week. They had arrived in our city tonight. The stakes were no longer just about real estate or public social humiliation. My brother was officially a dead man walking, and tomorrow night was going to be an absolute corporate bloodbath. I started the engine, pulling directly into traffic. I had absolutely nothing left to lose anymore. My family wanted a performance, and I would be the one to write the final brutal act. Tomorrow, the entire city would witness the total collapse of the mighty Montgomery Empire falling perfectly into my trap. Everything was completely ready. Now. The biting winter chill was masked by the overwhelming heat of flashing camera bulbs as we stepped onto the crimson carpet. The annual Entrepreneur of the Year charity gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a blinding sea of sequined gowns, tailored velvet tuxedos, and sparkling diamond necklaces. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated through the packed lobby, carrying silver trays of expensive champagne. Every politician, corporate investor, and media personality who mattered was in attendance tonight, trading hollow compliments. I stood at the entrance holding the two identical midnight blue leather portfolios tightly against my chest. My heart beat a steady, calm rhythm. Beside me stood my true family. George wore his only suit. It was clean and pressed but slightly frayed at the cuffs, a relic from a wedding he had attended decades ago. He was gently pushing Helen in a rented wheelchair. She looked frail and exhausted from her recent medical crisis, but she sat up straight, offering a brave, warm smile. Leo and Lily held onto the sides of her wheelchair, wearing their neatest church clothes, their small eyes wide with absolute awe at the massive sparkling chandeliers hanging above us. We were a glaring, undeniable contrast to the polished artificial perfection of the Montgomery Empire. And that was exactly why my mother intercepted us before we could even reach the cloakroom. Beatrice materialized from the crowded lobby like a predatory shark scenting blood in the water. She wore an emerald green gown that swept the marble floor and a heavy diamond necklace. Her flawless makeup could not hide the panicked desperation lurking just beneath her eyes. She marched directly toward us, her gaze sweeping over George and Helen with an expression of absolute disgust. "What is the meaning of this, Vanessa?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the reporters would not hear. "I told you to come alone and bring the documents. Why did you bring these people to a networking event? They do not belong here." I placed a protective hand on George's shoulder. "They are my family, Mother," I said, my voice calm and steady. "They are the only reason I survived the last 5 years. They are here to witness the transaction." Beatrice let out a breath. She snapped her fingers and 2 security guards immediately stepped forward from the shadows. "I do not care who they are," she whispered, her eyes flashing with malice. "Preston is the keynote speaker tonight. We have international investors sitting at the front tables. I will not have my son's big moment ruined by a bunch of working-class charity cases sitting in the front row." She turned to the security guards, pointing a manicured finger at George and Helen. "Escort these people to the overflow seating in the back hallway near the kitchen doors. Make sure they are completely out of sight of the press cameras." George stiffened, his jaw clenching, as the security guards took a step forward. Helen looked down at her lap, her brave smile faltering. Leo and Lily shrank back against my legs, frightened by the tension. A cold fury settled deep in my bones. I stepped in front of my in-laws, blocking the security guard's path. I looked my mother dead in the eyes and raised the 2 blue leather portfolios, pressing them against my chest. "You are making a miscalculation, Beatrice," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Inside these folders is the deed to the ranch and the property transfer documents you need to save your son from federal prison. I know what is at stake tonight. If those guards lay a finger on my family, I am turning around right now. I will walk out those doors, get back in my car, and burn these documents in my fireplace. You will not get a single acre of land, and Preston will be at the mercy of his creditors by midnight." The color drained from Beatrice's face. Her mask shattered, revealing the woman hiding underneath. She stared at the blue portfolios in my hands, realizing with horror that I held the keys to their survival. "You would not dare," she breathed, her voice trembling with panic. "You need the $250,000 for her surgery." I smiled a smile. "Try me," I challenged, taking one step backward toward the exit doors. "Let us see who blinks first, Mother. Let us see whose clock runs out faster." Beatrice's chest heaved as she struggled to breathe. She looked over her shoulder at the crowded ballroom where Preston was shaking hands with an investor. She looked back at me, her eyes wide with defeat. She raised a shaking hand and signaled the security guards to stand down. They stepped back, fading into the crowd. "Fine," she spat the word, tasting like poison on her tongue. "You win this round, Vanessa. They can stay in the main room." I shook my head, my smile vanishing. "Not just the main room," I corrected my tone, leaving no room for negotiation. "They are sitting at the VIP table next to the stage. They are going to have the best view in the house when Preston receives his award. And when I step onto that stage to sign the papers, they are going to be right there watching." Beatrice closed her eyes, taking a breath. She was trapped and she knew it. "Do whatever you want," she hissed, turning on her heel. "Just be ready when your brother calls you to the stage. Do not ruin this." She marched away, disappearing into the sea of elites. I turned back to George and Helen, letting my posture relax. George let out a breath, shaking his head. "You did not have to do that, Vanessa," he said. "We do not need to sit in the front. We are just here to support you." I squeezed his shoulder. "You are sitting at the best table in the room, George," I insisted. "You deserve to see this up close. Come on." We navigated through the lobby and entered the grand ballroom. The scale of the event was staggering. Massive floral centerpieces adorned dozens of tables. Soft classical music played from a string quartet in the corner. Photographers roamed the aisles, snapping pictures of the city families. An usher checked my name on a clipboard and guided us to a table located right at the edge of the elevated main stage. I helped George position Helen's wheelchair at the table and made sure Leo and Lily had a clear view of the podium. I took my seat, keeping the two blue portfolios resting firmly on my lap. My hands traced the leather edges, the dummy folder and the live folder. One held their salvation and the other held their destruction. I scanned the ballroom, observing the wealthy guests laughing and drinking wine. Preston was standing near the bar, soaking up the adoration of a politician. My father, Harrison, was busy charming a group of developers, unaware that his empire was about to evaporate. Then my eyes drifted toward the exit doors at the back of the room. Standing perfectly still in the shadows near the coat check were two massive, incredibly intimidating men. They stood out like glaring sore thumbs among the polished tuxedo-wearing crowd. They wore cheap, ill-fitting gray suits that stretched tightly across their broad, muscular shoulders. Their faces were scarred and hardened, radiating a quiet, violent energy that cut through the cheerful atmosphere of the gala. They were not eating. They were not drinking. They were not talking to anyone. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, their dark eyes scanning the room with predatory precision. I recognized them instantly from the anonymous photograph I had received yesterday. These were Preston's highly dangerous underground creditors. They had completely bypassed the building security and slipped into the gala unnoticed by the wealthy guests. They were not here to enjoy the charity event. They were here to collect their $7 million, and they were absolutely not leaving empty-handed. I watched as one of the men slowly raised a thick hand and tapped his wristwatch, looking directly at Preston across the room. Preston caught the movement. From 50 feet away, I saw my arrogant brother instantly freeze. The confident, charming smile vanished from his face, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had just snapped shut. He hurriedly excused himself from the politician and practically sprinted toward the main stage, his face pale and sweating under the harsh ballroom lights. The clock had officially run out. The creditors were in the room. The trap was fully and perfectly primed. I gripped the live blue portfolio tightly in my two hands, feeling the heavy weight of my family final reckoning. The spectacular show was absolutely about to begin, right now in front of everyone. The clinking of crystal and silver slowly died down as the grand ballroom lights dimmed to a warm amber glow. A single brilliant white spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the center stage. My father, Harrison Montgomery, stepped up to the polished mahogany podium, adjusting his silk tuxedo lapels. He looked every inch the distinguished patriarch, projecting an aura of immense power and benevolence. The crowd fell into an expectant hush. Harrison tapped the microphone, clearing his throat. His deep, resonant voice echoed through the massive speaker system, wrapping around the wealthy attendees like a thick velvet blanket. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, smiling warmly at the sea of faces. Tonight we celebrate entrepreneurship, innovation, and the relentless drive that builds this great city. But more importantly, we celebrate charity. We celebrate the fundamental duty of those who have achieved greatness to reach down and lift up those who are desperately drowning in the harsh realities of the world. He paused, letting the heavy words sink into the quiet room. At the VIP table, George tightened his grip on his water glass, his knuckles turning completely white. Helen reached over and placed her frail hand gently over mine. I kept my eyes locked on my father, maintaining a mask of perfect serenity, while my pulse hammered a steady rhythm against my ribs. I held the two midnight blue leather portfolios securely on my lap, shielding them beneath the edge of the draped tablecloth. As many of you know, our family has built an empire on strength and strategic foresight. Harrison continued, his tone shifting from grand to somber. But true strength is tested when your own blood falters. It is no secret that my daughter Vanessa has faced severe hardships. Since the tragic passing of her husband, she has struggled immensely. She attempted to manage a modest ranch property out in the county, but unfortunately she simply lacked the business acumen and the financial discipline required to keep her head above water. A collective murmur rippled through the massive ballroom. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward our table near the stage. Wealthy socialites whispered behind their hands, casting looks of profound, misplaced pity in my direction. I felt the heavy, oppressive weight of their judgment. They saw exactly what my father wanted them to see. A helpless, failed widow sitting with her poorly dressed in-laws, entirely dependent on the Montgomery family grace. She accumulated massive, overwhelming debts. Harrison declared, his voice dripping with fabricated sorrow. She allowed liens to be placed against her property, jeopardizing the very roof over the heads of my precious grandchildren. We tried to offer guidance, but pride is a stubborn flaw. Now she is facing absolute financial ruin and total destitution. George shifted violently in his chair, his face flushing with barely contained rage. "He is lying to all of them," George whispered fiercely. "Do not let him humiliate you like this, Vanessa." I squeezed George's hand lightly, never breaking eye contact with the man on the stage. "Let him dig the hole deeper, George," I whispered back. "The deeper he digs, the harder he falls." But the Montgomery family does not abandon its own. Harrison proclaimed, his voice rising in a dramatic crescendo of manufactured heroism. "When a ship is sinking, you do not scold the captain. You send a lifeboat. And tonight that lifeboat is my son, Preston Montgomery." The spotlight widened to include Preston, who strode onto the stage from the left wing. He wore a sharp black tuxedo and a bright, triumphant smile, but I could clearly see the frantic sweat gleaming on his forehead. His eyes darted nervously toward the back exit, where the two massive creditors still stood, watching his every single move like hungry wolves. Preston quickly snapped his attention back to the audience, waving modestly as a polite round of applause washed over the room. "Preston has selflessly agreed to step in and purchase Vanessa's worthless, failing ranch," Harrison announced, placing a proud hand on my brother's shoulder. "He is acquiring the barren land not for profit, but out of pure sibling devotion. He is paying off her crushing debts, lifting the massive lien against the estate, and ensuring that she and her children will not end up completely homeless on the streets of this city." This is the ultimate act of family loyalty. This is what true leadership looks like. The ballroom erupted into enthusiastic applause. The socialites nodded in deep approval, completely captivated by the false narrative of the benevolent brother saving the pathetic sister. Preston soaked in the adoration, his chest puffing out with sheer arrogance. He looked down at me from the elevated stage, his eyes flashing with cruel victory. He held a thick legal document in his hand. It was the official lien release form printed on premium ivory paper. Tonight we are not just talking about charity, Harrison concluded, raising his hands to quiet the audience. We are demonstrating it live. I invite my daughter Vanessa to join us up here right now. Let us finalize this act of salvation under the bright lights, where everyone can witness the healing power of family forgiveness. Come up here, Vanessa, and accept your fresh start. The spotlight instantly swung away from the podium and pinned me to my chair. The blinding white light illuminated my simple, elegant gown and the tense faces of my in-laws sitting beside me. The entire room fell completely silent, waiting for my reaction. They expected me to lower my head in absolute shame. They expected me to shuffle onto the stage like a defeated beggar accepting the breadcrumbs tossed from the high table. Instead, I stood up with slow, deliberate grace. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt and offered a soft, radiant smile to the hundreds of watching faces. I picked up the two identical midnight blue portfolios and held them casually at my side. I glanced down at Leo and Lily, offering them a reassuring wink before turning toward the stage stairs. I walked forward, my heels clicking sharply against the polished wood of the steps. The applause was scattered and polite, tinged with uncomfortable pity. I did not let it touch me. I kept my gaze locked directly on Preston and Harrison. As I reached the center of the stage, Harrison stepped back from the mahogany podium, offering me the space with a sweeping, condescending gesture. "Do the smart thing," Vanessa Preston muttered under his breath, leaning in close as I approached. "Sign the papers, hand over the deed, and take your pathetic little check. Do not try anything stupid, or I will ruin those people sitting at your table." I ignored his toxic whisper completely. I stepped up to the microphone, the bright spotlight washing over my face. I looked out at the vast sea of elites, the politicians, the media cameras capturing every single second of this public spectacle. Then I looked toward the back exit, meeting the cold, hard stares of the two underground creditors. The trap was absolutely perfect. "Thank you, Father," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the speaker system, echoing across the silent ballroom. "Your speech was incredibly moving. It is truly a beautiful thing to witness a family come together to solve a difficult financial crisis. And you are entirely correct. The burden of debt can be an absolute crushing weight, capable of destroying a person completely if they do not find immediate salvation." Harrison smiled proudly, assuming I was playing directly into his narrative. He nodded, urging me to continue my public surrender. However, I continued my tone, shifting from soft submission to crisp, absolute authority. "Before I sign the property transfer, handing over the land to my brother, there is a critical piece of legal protocol we must follow. A transaction of this immense magnitude requires total transparency. The lien against the estate must be officially released at the exact same moment the deed is surrendered." I turned away from the audience and looked directly at Beatrice, who was sitting comfortably at the primary sponsor table located just below the stage. She was sipping champagne, looking incredibly bored with the proceedings. "Mother," I called out, my voice ringing with undeniable command. "You are the primary holder of the financial lien against my late husband's estate. Preston is holding the release document, but it requires your physical signature to become legally binding. Please come up to the stage. Join us under the spotlight so we can execute this generous family bailout simultaneously." Beatrice froze, her champagne flute hovering halfway to her lips. She glared at me, her eyes narrowing with sudden suspicion. This was not part of their carefully choreographed script. I was supposed to quietly sign my name, take the check, and leave the stage in utter disgrace. I was not supposed to take the microphone and issue direct public demands. "Come forward, Mother," I prompted, projecting a radiant, absolutely flawless, incredibly polite socialite smile. Beatrice hesitated. The polite applause from the audience had completely faded, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. She looked at Harrison, whose confident smile was beginning to crack at the edges. He nodded at her, a sharp jerk of his chin signaling her to play along and get it over with. Beatrice stood up, smoothing the emerald silk of her designer gown, and walked toward the stage stairs. Her face was a mask of aristocratic grace, but her eyes shot pure venom as she ascended the steps. I met her gaze perfectly, holding the live blue leather portfolio in my hands. Preston shifted on his feet, his forced smile looking more like a grimace. He held out his hand, expecting me to hand over the dummy folder. I ignored him, stepping directly toward the podium where my father stood. I placed the open portfolio flat on the polished mahogany surface. The document inside was flawless. The official lien release form sat right on top, requiring only one signature to make the land free and clear. I offered my mother a silver fountain pen. The crowd watched with bated breath, entirely captivated by the Montgomery family theater. Beatrice snatched the pen from my fingers, her acrylic nails digging into my skin for a brief, spiteful second. "You are going to regret this little stunt, Vanessa," she whispered under her breath, her voice barely carrying over the ambient noise of the massive ballroom. I leaned in close, keeping my flawless smile intact. "Just sign the paper, Mother," I whispered back. "Sign it, and you can go back to your champagne." Beatrice gripped the edge of the podium. She looked down at the document, her eyes skimming the standard legal text. It was the exact form her lawyers had prepared, standard and unassuming. She pressed the silver tip of the pen against the thick parchment paper and signed her name with a sharp, aggressive flourish. The dark ink dried instantly. The ultimate trap was successfully sprung. The absolute second the pen lifted from the page, I moved with practiced, ruthless precision. I did not wait for her to step back, or for Harrison to make another grand announcement. I reached out, grabbed the freshly signed lien release document, and folded it in half. Before Beatrice or Preston could even register my sudden movement, I slipped the heavy parchment directly into my designer evening bag and snapped the golden clasp shut. The sharp click echoed through the microphone on the podium, sounding like a heavy wooden gavel striking a judge block. "What are you doing?" Beatrice demanded, her voice sharp and suddenly panicked. "Where is the deed transfer? Give the deed to your brother." I stepped back from the podium, leaving the empty blue portfolio resting on the wood. I did not reach into my gown for the dummy folder. I did not offer them the $250,000 contract they desperately needed. Instead, I looked out at the vast, glittering audience. The faces of the city elite were turned toward the stage, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine confusion. I felt the heavy gaze of the two massive creditors lingering by the exit doors. They had not moved an inch, their cold eyes fixed entirely on Preston. I raised my hand and looked toward the back of the massive ballroom, locking eyes with the technician sitting in the elevated audiovisual booth. I gave him a single definitive nod. The technician, whom I had paid handsomely earlier that afternoon, immediately pressed a button on his complex digital control board. The soft amber lighting of the grand ballroom instantly dimmed, plunging the audience into expectant shadow. Behind the stage, the massive projector screen previously displaying the Charity Gala logo flickered to life. A blinding white light illuminated the entire stage, casting long, sharp shadows across the faces of my father, my mother, and my brother. The crowd let out a collective gasp as a massive, high-resolution legal document appeared on the screen, magnified to 20 feet tall for every single person in the room to read. It was not a pathetic deed transfer to Preston Montgomery. It was the finalized, fully executed corporate buyout contract from the international eco-resort developer. The corporate logo of the massive conglomerate sat proudly at the top of the page, absolute. Below it, the terms of the sale were laid out in clear, undeniable legal text printed in bold black letters. I grabbed the microphone from the stand, my voice echoing with a calm, terrifying authority that cut through the sudden, frantic murmurs of the crowd. "Thank you, Father," I said, my words dropping like heavy stones into the silent room. "Thank you for your incredibly moving speech about family loyalty." And thank you, Mother, for publicly signing the absolute release of the lien against my late husband's estate. It was the final requirement I needed to legally close this transaction. I turned toward the massive screen behind me, gesturing gracefully toward the magnified document. I want to share this profound moment of financial salvation with all of you tonight. As you can see, the ranch has indeed been sold. However, it was not sold to my brother. It was acquired this afternoon by a global development firm. The laser pointer in my hand clicked on, casting a bright red dot. I circled the final purchase price, highlighting the bold, undeniable numbers for the entire city elite to witness. The crowd erupted. The polite, restrained atmosphere of the charity gala vanished instantly, replaced by a chaotic wave of shocked gasps, loud whispers, and absolute disbelief. The numbers glowed on the screen, burning themselves into the retinas of every single investor, politician, and media personality in the room. $88 million. The sheer magnitude of the sum hit the ballroom like a shockwave. Flashbulbs from the press cameras suddenly began to fire, strobing frantically as reporters scrambled to capture the massive screen and the stunned faces of the Montgomery family on the stage. At the VIP table directly below the stage, George sat perfectly still, his jaw dropping as he stared up at the massive numbers. Helen covered her mouth with both trembling hands, tears of absolute shock and profound relief. Those joyful tears were spilling down her pale cheeks. Leo and Lily cheered, not fully understanding the complex financial details, but recognizing the absolute triumph radiating from my posture. I looked back at my family, my real family, and offered them a genuine, victorious smile. They were safe now. The oppressive nightmare of poverty and fear had been permanently banished by the glowing numbers projected above us. Then I turned my attention back to the people standing beside me. Harrison looked as though he had been physically struck by a speeding freight train. He stumbled backward, his hand gripping the edge of the mahogany podium to keep himself from collapsing completely onto the floor. His perfect aristocratic face was entirely drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single coherent sound. The powerful patriarch of the Montgomery family was completely rendered utterly speechless in front of everyone. Beatrice stood frozen, staring at the empty blue portfolio on the podium, her mind frantically trying to process the catastrophic mistake she had just made. She had signed the lien release. She had surrendered her only point of leverage. She had handed me the absolute keys to the kingdom completely legally in front of hundreds of witnesses. Her desperate, cruel plan to humiliate me had backfired with devastating, lethal precision, leaving her publicly humiliated instead. But it was Preston who truly understood the lethal, immediate danger of the situation. He stared up at the $88 million figure on the massive screen, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. The color drained from his face, turning his skin a sickly, terrifying shade of pale gray. He looked down at his own empty hands, realizing he held absolutely nothing. The worthless property transfer he desperately needed had vanished entirely. His eyes, wide with sheer, unadulterated terror, darted frantically over the heads of the affluent crowd, searching desperately for the back exit doors. The two massive creditors in the cheap gray suits had stepped forward from the deep shadows. They were no longer simply watching from afar. They were moving deliberately down the center aisle, pushing past the shocked socialites, their cold, violent eyes locked permanently on Preston. They knew exactly what the massive document on the screen meant for their missing cash. Preston did not have the land. He did not have their money. He was worthless to them now. A primal, desperate panic seized my brother. He lunged forward, his hands trembling violently as he grabbed the microphone stand. He ripped it from my grasp, nearly knocking me over. "No," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is a fake. The document is fake. Turn the screen off now." Preston lunged forward, his hands grasping frantically for the microphone stand. I anticipated his desperate move perfectly. With a swift, fluid motion, I pivoted to the side, letting his momentum carry him past me. He stumbled awkwardly, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the polished wooden stage. Before he could regain his balance, I stepped smoothly to the center of the platform, holding the heavy silver microphone firmly in my right hand. I looked down at my phone resting on the podium. A bright green notification banner flashed across the screen, confirming the final digital execution of our complex plan. "The document is absolutely authentic, Preston," I said, my voice echoing with crystal clear precision through the massive speakers. "And I can officially confirm that as of 10 seconds ago, the $88 million wire transfer has completely cleared our secure digital escrow. The funds are currently sitting safely in my personal accounts." The ballroom erupted into another wave of deafening gasps and frantic whispers. The wealthy socialites who had pitied me only 5 minutes ago were now staring at me with a mixture of absolute awe and raw, unfiltered shock. My father Harrison remained frozen nearby on stage. He stood near the edge of the platform, his face a mask of pale, terrified realization. He watched his entire financial empire crumble under the weight of my public retaliation. Preston scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting frantically toward the back of the room, where his two massive underworld creditors were steadily advancing down the center aisle. They were walking with slow, deliberate steps, their cold eyes locked on my brother. Preston opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his impending ruin. I turned my back completely. I turned away from my biological family, completely ignoring their pathetic display of panic. I directed my attention exclusively to the VIP table, situated directly below the stage edge. George and Helen were sitting perfectly still, looking up at me with eyes full of overwhelming emotion. Leo and Lily were holding their grandmother hands, sensing the profound shift in the atmosphere. For the last 5 years, I was told that I was a complete failure. I continued, my voice softening slightly, but retaining its commanding edge. I was repeatedly told by the people standing behind me today that I lacked the intelligence, the discipline, and the worth to survive in this world. When my husband passed away, they did not offer me a single ounce of comfort. They offered me impossible ultimatums. When I was struggling to pay for basic groceries and fighting to keep my children safe, they turned their backs and locked their heavy doors. The ballroom fell into a stunned, captive silence. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. Every single guest was hanging on to my every word, watching the polished facade of the Montgomery family shatter perfectly. They shattered into a million jagged pieces right there. "But I was not entirely alone," I said, looking directly into George's tear-filled eyes. "When my own blood abandoned me to freeze, when they left my fatherless twins to face a harsh, terrifying reality without a safety net, another family stepped forward. They did not have vast corporate wealth, they did not have sprawling mansions or powerful political connections, but they had something far more valuable. They had unconditional love." I paused, taking a deep, steadying breath to keep my emotions in check. Helen pressed her hand against her mouth. Her fragile shoulders shook with quiet, overwhelming, beautiful sobs. George sat up straighter, his jaw clenched with fierce, protective pride. George and Helen took us in without a single second of hesitation. I declared, my voice ringing with absolute gratitude. They gave us their home, their food, and their unwavering protection. They sacrificed their own comfort and security to ensure my children never went to bed hungry. They loved me like their own daughter, and they never once asked for a single thing in return. They proved that true family is entirely defined by actions and choices, not biology. It is not defined simply by an accident of genetics. I reached into the hidden pocket of my evening gown and pulled out a separate, thick envelope. I held it up for the entire ballroom to see. "Tonight, I am officially changing the narrative," I announced. "Tonight, I am ensuring that the people who actually saved my life will never have to worry about a single financial burden ever again. I have legally established a $40 million irrevocable trust in the names of George and Helen. This trust is completely sealed and actively managed by incredible banking sector professionals. The funds are actively managed by top-tier corporate fiduciaries. It will permanently cover all of Helen's upcoming medical surgeries, her extensive recovery care, and their absolute comfort for the rest of their lives. A stunned murmur swept through the crowd, followed by a sudden spontaneous wave of genuine applause from the back of the room. The wealthy investors and politicians were witnessing an unprecedented act of raw emotional justice. "You will never lose your house, George," Bree said, looking down at the brave man who had physically thrown my brother off his porch. "You will never worry about bills. You will never have to worry about the cost of an ambulance or a hospital bed ever again. The money is legally yours, and it is completely untouchable forever now." Helen let out a loud, joyful sob, pulling Leo and Lily into a fierce embrace. George quickly wiped a tear from his weathered cheek, looking up at me with an expression of profound, boundless gratitude. It was the absolute greatest moment of my entire life. I had secured their future, and I had done it by dismantling the very people who had tried to destroy us. But the beautiful moment, the beautiful emotional triumph, was violently interrupted by loud screaming. A sharp, feral shriek suddenly echoed across the massive stage. Beatrice Montgomery had finally snapped completely under the massive pressure. The realization that $40 million was being handed over to the very people she despised completely shattered her fragile aristocratic composure. She abandoned all pretenses of high society grace and practically sprinted across the stage, her emerald gown whipping around her ankles. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "You cannot do this," Beatrice screamed, lunging toward me with clawed hands. "You ungrateful little wretch. You belong to us and you owe us everything now." I stepped back smoothly, keeping the microphone firmly in my grasp. My father tried to grab her arm to pull her back and salvage some tiny shred of their public dignity, but she violently shoved him away. She was entirely consumed by toxic, raging greed. She reached the podium and grabbed the base of my microphone stand, yanking it violently toward her face. "That money belongs to the Montgomery family!" Beatrice shrieked into the open microphone, her voice amplified to a deafening volume across the grand ballroom. "We raised you. We paid for your expensive education and your perfect life. We fed you and clothed you and gave you our highly respected name. You owe us that money right now. I demand my rightful cut as your actual biological mother." The entire ballroom recoiled in absolute disgust at her words. The wealthy socialites who had clapped for my father's fake charity speech were now staring at Beatrice with open, undeniable horror. She was publicly demanding a cut of the funds I had just given to a dying woman. She was broadcasting her shallow, toxic greed to the most powerful people in the city. "You owe us!" Beatrice continued to scream, her eyes wildly glaring at me with raw, unhinged fury. Her eyes were completely wild and heavily bloodshot with rage. "We spent millions raising you to be a proper lady. You cannot just give $40 million to these pathetic dirt farming nobodies. They are nothing compared to us today. We are your real family. Give me the trust access codes right now, Vanessa, before I ruin you completely forever." I stood perfectly still, letting her manic, toxic screaming echo through the massive speakers. I did not interrupt her rant. I did not try to shout over her loud voice. I simply let her completely destroy her own public image in front of the very society she worshipped above all. Every camera in the room flashed rapidly, capturing her madness. Every single camera in the room was recording her feral meltdown. Every journalist was taking frantic notes on their pads. The Montgomery family reputation was officially dead and buried under a mountain of her own greedy words. Preston was still paralyzed, watching his impending doom approach from the center aisle. Harrison covered his face with his hands, realizing the absolute finality of their complete destruction in front of the world. I watched Beatrice unravel completely. Her face was flushed and ugly mottled red, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. She clutched the microphone stand as if it were the last piece of driftwood in a churning, violent ocean. Slowly, I reached out and wrapped my hand around the smooth metal of the microphone shaft, right above her white-knuckled grip. I did not pull or yank. I simply exerted a steady, unstoppable pressure until her fingers finally gave way. I pulled the microphone back to my lips, maintaining my perfectly calm demeanor against her raging hysteria. "Mother, you speak so passionately about the sacred bonds of blood," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register that commanded absolute silence from the vast ballroom. "You demand loyalty and a massive financial cut simply because we share a last name. But you taught me a very different valuable lesson. When my husband died and my children were starving, you taught me that blood only matters when it does not bleed you dry." Beatrice opened her mouth to scream another toxic insult, but the sheer icy authority in my voice froze the words in her throat. She stumbled backward, her emerald gown catching on the edge of a speaker cable. I turned my attention to the center of the stage where Preston remained completely paralyzed. He looked like a cornered animal sweating profusely under the blazing white stage lights. "You paraded Preston out here tonight as the ultimate savior," I continued, addressing the hundreds of elite guests staring up at us. "You painted him as the brilliant, successful golden child rushing in to rescue his pathetic sister from financial ruin. But this family has always prioritized preserving an illusion over confronting the actual financial reality. So let us look now. Let us see the true face of the golden child today." I raised my left hand, signaling the technician in the elevated audiovisual booth. The massive projector screen behind us flickered once again. The bold $88 million buyout contract vanished instantly. In its place, a cascade of highly confidential financial documents filled the 20-foot screen. They were bank statements, foreclosure notices, and official legal filings, all bearing Preston Montgomery's name. Red negative numbers dominated the screen, a glaring, catastrophic ocean of insurmountable debt. The audience gasped in unison, a wave of shocked murmurs rippling through the diamond-studded crowd. Preston let out a strangled, pathetic whine, taking a shaky step backward. "Behold, the savior of the Montgomery family," I declared, pointing sharply at the glaring documents. "Preston is not a successful businessman. He is currently facing absolute total bankruptcy. His companies are nothing but empty, hollow shells. They are corporations bleeding millions of dollars every single quarter. He has burned through every ounce of goodwill, every line of credit, and every single favor in this city to fund his lavish, reckless lifestyle." I clicked the laser pointer, circling a specific document in the center of the screen. It was a property deed, but not for my ranch. It was the deed to the historic Montgomery estate, the primary family mansion located in the most exclusive zip code in the entire state. But his personal failures were not enough. I continued, my voice ringing with righteous fury. When the banks finally cut him off, Preston resorted to blatant illegal fraud. That document right there is a collateral agreement. Preston forged Harrison's signature and illegally leveraged the primary family mansion to secure high-interest loans from dangerous, unregulated underground lenders. He bet the family legacy on his arrogant failures, and he lost everything completely. Harrison let out a sharp, devastated groan. He clutched his chest, staring up at the forged signature on the massive screen. He turned to look at Preston, his eyes wide with horrified betrayal. "You did what Harrison," rasped, his booming voice reduced to a frail, broken whisper. "You mortgaged my house." Preston could not even look his father in the eye. He shrank into himself, a pathetic coward exposed under the bright stage lights. Beatrice scrambled forward, her hands waving frantically. "This is a lie!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "She hacked those documents. She is just a bitter, jealous widow trying to destroy her brother. Do not listen to her." I shook my head slowly, leveling a cold, merciless stare at my mother. "You knew, Mother. You both knew exactly what he was doing, and you chose to enable him anyway. You allowed him. You allowed him to bleed you dry because admitting his failure meant admitting your perfect family narrative was an absolute total lie. But the worst part, the truly unforgivable part, is what you sacrificed to keep his pathetic illusion alive." I signaled the audiovisual booth one final time. The screen went completely dark, plunging the stage into stark, dramatic shadows. A crisp, clean audio file began to play through the massive concert speakers surrounding the ballroom. The acoustics of the expensive sound system made the voices crystal clear. It was the recording I had captured weeks ago during our tense confrontation at the country club dining room. The unmistakable, arrogant voice of Beatrice Montgomery echoed perfectly through the silent, shocked ballroom. Of course we had to abandon her. The recorded voice of Beatrice sneered, dripping with callous, cruel indifference. Do you have any idea how much money Preston needed today? He needed money to keep his companies afloat. We could not waste our liquid capital saving Vanessa and those two screaming infant twins. Let them freeze for all I care. Preston is the future of this family. Vanessa is just a burden. We cut her off so Preston could survive. It was the only logical choice. The audio recording clicked off, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. The reality of her own toxic words hung over the ballroom like a thick, poisonous cloud. The elite members of society, the philanthropists, the politicians, the wealthy socialites, they were all staring at Beatrice with absolute, unmasked disgust. The physical revulsion in the room was palpable. Beatrice raised her hands to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically across the sea of judgmental faces. She looked at her friends, her peers, her fellow board members everywhere in the vast crowded room now. Women she had dined with and plotted with for decades were now turning their faces away, shaking their heads in profound disgust. The social ruin was instantaneous and absolute. She was no longer the respected matriarch of a powerful dynasty. She was a monster who had left her fatherless grandchildren to freeze just to fund her son illegal gambling and fraud. I did not mean it like that, Beatrice stammered, taking a weak, trembling step toward the edge of the stage. You are taking my words out of context. Please, you must understand. But nobody was listening to her pathetic excuses. The journalists in the room were typing furiously, their phones capturing every second of the Montgomery family total annihilation. The carefully constructed fortress of their reputation had been completely obliterated, turned to ash by their own greedy, toxic actions. Harrison stumbled back to the mahogany podium, gripping it tightly. He gripped it like a dying man. He looked out at the room, his life work destroyed, his legacy turned into a cruel, humiliating joke. He was a ruined man, stripped of his power and his dignity. Preston stood frozen, completely isolated on the massive stage. He had no money, he had no property, he had no family protection left to hide behind. His crimes were broadcast to the entire city, and his victims were finally seeing the absolute truth. I looked down at George and Helen, who were watching me with fierce, proud tears in their eyes. I had done it. I had protected my real family and destroyed the monsters who had tried to bury us. I lowered the microphone, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over my entire body. I turned my back on the pathetic remnants of the Montgomery family, preparing to walk down now. I was preparing to walk down the stage stairs and join the people who actually loved me. But the night was not quite over yet. A sudden heavy movement at the back of the massive ballroom caught my immediate attention. The crowd parted nervously like the Red Sea, stepping aside to avoid the cold, dangerous energy radiating from the back exit. The two massive creditors, wearing their cheap gray suits and carrying the heavy weight of unregulated debt, had finally seen enough. They stood up from their positions by the doors, their faces carved from cold, hard stone. They began walking purposefully down the center aisle, their heavy boots thudding rhythmically against the carpet. They were not looking at me. They were not looking at Harrison or Beatrice. Their dead, violent eyes were locked directly on Preston. It was time for him to pay his immense dark debts right now. The two massive men did not break their stride as they reached the edge of the stage. They bypassed the decorative floral arrangements and stepped directly onto the polished mahogany platform. The taller of the two, a man with a jagged scar cutting through his thick eyebrow, reached out and grabbed Preston by the lapel of his custom tuxedo. He hoisted my brother onto his tiptoes. The sheer physical power of the movement made the remaining socialites gasp and scatter, pushing their expensive chairs backward in a frantic bid to escape the blast radius. You told us you had the land secured. Preston? The scarred man growled, his voice carrying easily through the stunned silence of the ballroom. You sat in our office yesterday and swore on your father's reputation that the deed would be in our hands by midnight. You owe us $12 million. We are done waiting for your pathetic excuses. Preston choked, scrambling uselessly against the heavy grip. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson as he struggled to breathe. I swear I can get it, he stammered, a thick layer of panic coating his high-pitched voice. The developer, the resort people, I can call them. I can broker a secondary deal. Just give me one more week. The second creditor stepped forward and slapped the microphone stand out of the way. It crashed onto the stage floor with an ear-splitting shriek of audio feedback, causing the guests to cover their ears in pain. You do not have a week, the second man stated, his tone utterly devoid of emotion. You do not have a day. You committed fraud using property you do not own. We want our money right now, or we are taking collateral. He turned his dead violent eyes toward Harrison. The father pays the son debts. That is the rule. Harrison Montgomery. The great untouchable patriarch shrank back against the podium. He raised his trembling hands in a desperate, placating gesture. Gentlemen, please. He begged, all his former arrogance entirely evaporated. We are civilized people. We can resolve this quietly in my private office. I have liquid assets I can liquidate immediately. Do not do this in front of my peers. The scarred man shoved Preston to the floor. Preston landed hard on his hands and knees, scrambling backward like a frightened child. Your peers already know you are completely bankrupt, old man. The creditor spat, gesturing toward the blank projector screen. Your daughter just broadcast your absolute ruin to the entire city. You have no liquid assets. You have a mortgaged mansion and a mountain of toxic debt. We are taking everything. The reality of their total destruction finally registered in Beatrice's mind. Her husband was cowering. Her golden child was whimpering on the floor. Her reputation was incinerated. She spun around, her eyes locking onto me with a terrifying, feral intensity. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone in wild, frantic strands. You did this, she screamed, her voice tearing through her throat. You ruined us. You stole our future, you ungrateful, treacherous parasite. Beatrice lunged. She completely abandoned any lingering pretense of sanity. She threw herself across the stage, her manicured hands extended toward my face, like claws aiming directly for my eyes. She intended to physically tear me apart to extract her revenge through sheer violence. I did not flinch. I stood my ground, watching the pathetic remains of my mother reduce herself to a common street brawler. Before Beatrice could even close the distance, two massive event security guards intercepted her. They had been moving toward the stage the moment the creditors arrived, but now they recognized the true immediate threat. They grabbed Beatrice by both arms, dragging her backward. She fought them with the frantic, thrashing energy of a trapped wild animal. Let me go, she shrieked, kicking her expensive heels at their shins. She belongs to me. She owes me. I am her mother. I will kill you, Vanessa. I will destroy you. Ma'am, you need to calm down immediately, or we will forcefully detain you for assault. The lead security guard ordered, twisting her arm firmly behind her back. You are instigating a hostile altercation. I looked at her, thrashing and screaming, utterly stripped of the false elegance she had weaponized against me for my entire life. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, refreshing clarity. The toxic chains she had wrapped around my neck for 30 years had finally shattered into dust. I turned my back on her wild screaming and calmly walked down the stage stairs. My posture was perfectly straight, my steps steady and unhurried. I approached the VIP table where George and Helen were already standing. George had positioned himself firmly in front of Helen and the twins, his broad shoulders squared and ready to defend us from the escalating madness on the stage. We are leaving, George, I said, placing a gentle hand on his tense arm. The show is completely over. They have exactly what they deserve. George nodded once, a fiercely proud smile breaking through the hard lines of his weathered face. You did wonderful, kid, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Your late husband would be so incredibly proud of the woman you are right now. I crouched down to eye level with Leo and Lily. They looked slightly apprehensive at the shouting, but they trusted me implicitly. I smoothed their hair, offering them a bright, warm smile. "Come on, my little loves," I said, taking their small hands in mine. "It is time to go home. We have a wonderful new life waiting for us." Helen wrapped her arm around my waist, leaning her frail weight against me. I held her close, supporting her as we turned toward the main exit of the grand ballroom. The sea of wealthy elites parted for us instantly. The very people who had looked down their noses at me 20 minutes ago now stepped aside with wide eyes and palpable respect. They parted like a living wave, creating a clear, unobstructed path to the heavy mahogany doors. I did not lower my gaze. I looked straight ahead, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable power. I was no longer the weak, abandoned daughter. I was no longer the pathetic charity case widow. I was a woman who had single-handedly dismantled a corrupt empire to protect her own. The frantic shouts of my mother, the pathetic pleading of my brother, and the harsh demands of the creditors faded into a chaotic symphony behind me. It was the soundtrack of their ruin, and it was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. We pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the cool, crisp night air. The opulent facade of the Grand Hotel felt entirely different now. It was no longer a symbol of my family oppressive wealth. It was just a building, and I was leaving it behind forever. A sleek, black luxury SUV was idling perfectly at the curb, precisely where I had arranged for it to be. The uniformed driver immediately stepped out, opening the rear doors with a respectful nod. He offered his hand to Helen, helping her carefully into the plush leather interior. George lifted the twins, settling them safely into their seats before climbing in beside them. I stood on the sidewalk for one final moment, letting the cold wind wash over my face. I took a deep, cleansing breath. The scent of city rain and freedom filled my lungs. As I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed sharply inside my designer evening bag. I paused, slipping the device from the silk-lined compartment. The screen illuminated the darkness, displaying a secure, encrypted text message from my primary bank concierge. I opened the message, my eyes scanning the crisp, professional text. "Transaction fully confirmed, Mrs. Montgomery. The remaining $48 million from the land acquisition has been permanently routed and locked into the offshore, untouchable accounts as per your exact instructions. The principal balances are entirely secured for you, Leo and Lily. No external entity can access, trace, or contest these funds. Your financial independence is absolute. Have a wonderful evening." A slow and triumphant smile spread across my face. My children were safe. George and Helen were protected, and the vast fortune I had legally secured from the ashes of my biological family greed was untouchable. Harrison, Beatrice, and Preston would spend the rest of their miserable lives fighting over the scraps of their ruined empire, fighting off creditors, and facing total public disgrace. They would never see a single dime of the $88 million. I slipped the phone back into my bag and climbed into the warm, luxurious cabin of the SUV. The driver closed the door, shutting out the noise of the city completely. "Where to tonight, madam?" the driver asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Home. George and Helen Place." I replied, my voice steady and resonant in the quiet luxury of the cabin. "Take us home." The drive through the glittering city streets felt like a victory lap. I watched the neon reflections slide across the tinted windows, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace settling deep into my bones. The frantic, desperate energy that had defined my life for the past 5 years was completely gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable strength. When we finally pulled into the modest driveway of George and Helen House, the porch light was shining like a beacon in the dark. We walked inside together, a united front, a true family bound by loyalty and shared survival. I tucked Leo and Lily into their beds, kissing their foreheads and whispering promises of a beautiful, secure future. For the first time since my husband passed away, I slept soundly without a single nightmare. The next morning broke with crisp, brilliant sunshine. I woke up early, brewing a pot of strong coffee and sitting at the small kitchen table. I opened my tablet and scrolled through the morning news. The headlines were absolutely spectacular. The financial world was completely ablaze with the overnight destruction of the Montgomery Empire. The media had devoured the story with ruthless efficiency. Every major news outlet featured front-page articles detailing Preston's staggering insolvency, his illegal use of the family mansion as collateral, and the shocking audio recording of my mother callous cruelty. Financial commentators were already dissecting the fraudulent loans and predicting swift federal indictments. The Montgomery name, once a symbol of untouchable elite power, was now synonymous with pathetic criminal desperation. They were ruined. The absolute social and financial annihilation I had orchestrated was complete. I took a slow, satisfied sip of my coffee, relishing the quiet warmth of the kitchen. George and Helen were still asleep upstairs, exhausted from the emotional whiplash of the previous night. The twins were resting peacefully. The world outside was spinning into total chaos for my biological family, but inside this house, everything was safe and secure. My quiet morning was abruptly interrupted by the sharp, insistent buzzing of the front doorbell. It was not a polite chime. It was a frantic, desperate hammering accompanied by heavy fists pounding against the solid wood of the door. I set my coffee mug down perfectly calm. I knew exactly who it was. The wolves had finally run out of places to hide. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps silent against the hardwood floor. I did not feel a single spike of anxiety. The fear they used to instill in me had been completely eradicated. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy front door open. Standing on the porch, bathed in the harsh morning sunlight, were Harrison and Beatrice Montgomery. The sight of them was almost shocking in its utter, pathetic reality. They looked entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, pristine monarchs who had stood on the stage just 12 hours ago. Harrison's tailored tuxedo was gone, replaced by a rumpled, hastily buttoned trench coat. His face was gray and deeply lined, his eyes bloodshot and swollen from a night of absolute terror. He looked like an old, broken man. Beatrice was in an even worse state. The flawless, aristocratic matriarch had completely vanished. Her hair was a tangled, messy nest around her pale face. Her makeup from the previous night was smeared in dark, ugly streaks beneath her eyes. She wore an oversized sweater that looked like it had been pulled from a laundry hamper. She was shaking violently, her hands gripping the strap of her purse with white-knuckled desperation. They looked exactly like what they were. Two cornered, terrified people facing the total collapse of their entire world. Vanessa. Beatrice gasped, her voice a ragged, broken wheeze. She lunged forward as if to grab my arms, but I took a smooth, deliberate step backward, creating an invisible, impenetrable barrier between us. I stood in the doorway, blocking their entry. I did not invite them inside. I did not offer them a seat. I simply stood there, projecting a cold, towering wall of absolute indifference. I waited in perfect, icy silence, letting them drown in their own humiliating desperation. "Please," Vanessa, Harrison begged, his deep, booming voice reduced to a pathetic, wavering croak. "You have to help us. The media is everywhere. They are camped outside the mansion. The banks locked our accounts this morning. They froze absolutely everything. We have nothing left, Vanessa. The creditors are threatening to seize the house today. They are going to throw us out onto the street." He swallowed hard, his chest heaving with panic. "And Preston," he continued, tears actually spilling down his weathered cheeks. "The federal authorities are looking for Preston. They are drafting indictments for wire fraud and illegal leveraged assets. They are going to put him in a federal prison, Vanessa. He will not survive in there. You know he will not survive. You have to stop this. You have $48 million sitting in cash. You can pay off the loans. You can make the creditors go away. You can save your brother." I stared at him, my expression completely devoid of any emotion. I felt absolutely no pity for the man standing before me. He was reaping the exact harvest he had sown. "We are begging you," Beatrice sobbed, dropping to her knees on the hard wooden porch. It was a stunning display of total submission from a woman who had spent my entire life looking down her nose at me. "Please, Vanessa, I know we made mistakes. I know we were harsh. But we are your parents. We are your blood. You cannot just stand there and watch your own family be destroyed. We need just a fraction of that money. Just enough to stop the foreclosure and pay off the underground lenders. You have more than enough. You will not even miss it. She reached out, grasping the hem of my morning robe with trembling, frantic fingers. I looked down at her hand, then slowly pulled the fabric away from her grasp. I did not speak. The silence was my weapon, and I wielded it with ruthless precision. Vanessa, remember when you were little? Beatrice cried, switching tactics, diving desperately into a pool of fabricated nostalgia. Remember the summers we spent at the lake house? Remember how I used to brush your hair and tell you how beautiful you were? We loved you. We always loved you. We were just trying to protect the family legacy. We were trying to teach you how the real world works. You cannot throw away a lifetime of memories over one misunderstanding. You are a Montgomery. You have our blood in your veins. You have a duty to protect us. Her emotional manipulation was so incredibly transparent, it was almost insulting. She was using memories that never actually existed, trying to paint a picture of a loving childhood that had been defined exclusively by her cold, critical judgment. She was crying about family loyalty after publicly admitting she had abandoned me to freeze. Harrison dropped to his knees right beside her, his head bowed in ultimate defeat. "You have won, Vanessa," he whispered, staring at the wooden floorboards. "You proved you are the smartest, the strongest. You beat us. We admit it. We surrender completely. Just please show some mercy. Show the grace that we failed to show you. Do not let your mother become homeless. Do not let your brother go to a federal penitentiary. Be the bigger person." I looked at the two of them kneeling on the porch of the people they had called dirt-farming nobodies. I let their pathetic, desperate pleas wash over me, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, hollow satisfaction. They were not sorry for what they had done to me. They were only sorry that they had been caught. They were only sorry that they had lost. I reached my right hand deep into the pocket of my robe. My fingers brushed against the crisp, folded paper I had prepared earlier this morning. I had been waiting for this exact moment for 5 incredibly long, agonizing years. I slowly pulled my hand from my pocket. Harrison and Beatrice looked up, their bloodshot eyes widening with a sudden frantic spark of hope. They thought I was reaching for a checkbook to save them. I unfolded the small stack of paper and held it out toward my mother. I handed her exactly $200 in crumpled bills. It was the precise amount of cash they had coldly given me 5 years ago when they turned me and my babies away to freeze in the snow. Beatrice stared at the money in absolute horror as the horrific realization finally crashed down upon her shattered pride. I closed the heavy door firmly in their desperate, pleading faces, walking away. I watched my mother unravel completely. Her face was flushed and ugly, mottled red, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. She clutched the microphone stand as if it were the last piece of driftwood in a churning, violent ocean. Slowly, I reached out and wrapped my hand around the smooth metal of the microphone shaft right above her white-knuckled grip. I did not pull or yank. I simply exerted a steady, unstoppable pressure until her fingers finally gave way. I pulled the microphone back to my lips, maintaining my perfectly calm demeanor against her raging, manic hysteria entirely. "Mother, you speak so passionately about the sacred bonds of blood," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register that commanded absolute silence from the vast ballroom. "You demand loyalty and a massive financial cut simply because we share a last name. But you taught me a very different, valuable lesson. When my husband died and my children were starving, you taught me that blood only matters when it does not bleed you dry." Beatrice opened her mouth to scream another toxic insult, but the sheer, icy authority in my voice froze the words in her throat immediately. She stumbled backward, her emerald gown catching on the edge of a speaker cable. I turned my attention to the center of the stage where Preston remained completely paralyzed. He looked like a cornered animal sweating profusely under the blazing white stage lights. "You paraded Preston out here tonight as the ultimate savior," I continued, addressing the hundreds of elite guests staring up at us. You painted him as the brilliant, successful golden child, rushing in to rescue his pathetic sister from financial ruin. But this family has always prioritized preserving an illusion over confronting the dark, actual financial reality. So let us look now. Let us see the true face of the golden child today. I raised my left hand, signaling the technician in the elevated audio-visual booth. The massive projector screen behind us flickered once again. The bold $88 million buyout contract simply vanished instantly. In its place, a cascade of highly confidential financial documents filled the 20-foot screen. They were bank statements, foreclosure notices, and official legal filings, all bearing Preston Montgomery name. Red negative numbers dominated the screen, a glaring, catastrophic ocean of insurmountable debt. The audience gasped loudly in pure, unadulterated shock. A wave of frantic murmurs rippled through the diamond-studded crowd. Preston let out a strangled, pathetic whine, taking a shaky step backward. "Behold the savior of the Montgomery family," I declared, pointing sharply at the glaring documents. Preston is not a successful businessman. He is currently facing absolute total bankruptcy. His companies are nothing but empty, hollow shells. They are corporations bleeding millions of dollars every single quarter. He has burned through every ounce of goodwill, every line of credit, and every single favor in this city to fund his lavish, reckless lifestyle. He is completely, entirely broke now. I clicked the laser pointer, circling a specific document in the center of the screen. It was a property deed, but not for my ranch. It was the deed to the historic Montgomery estate. The primary family mansion located in the most exclusive zip code in the entire state. But his personal failures were not enough. I continued, my voice ringing with righteous fury. When the banks finally cut him off, Preston resorted to blatant illegal fraud. That document right there is a collateral agreement. Preston forged Harrison's signature and illegally leveraged the primary family mansion to secure massive loans. He took highly illegal funding from dangerous, unregulated underground lenders. He bet the family legacy on his arrogant failures, and he lost everything completely. Harrison let out a sharp, devastated groan. He clutched his chest, staring up at the forged signature on the massive screen. He turned to look at Preston, his eyes wide with horrified betrayal. "You did what Harrison rasped, his booming voice reduced to a frail, broken whisper. You mortgaged my house." Preston could not even look his father in the eye. He shrank into himself, a pathetic coward, exposed under the bright, relentless stage lights now. Beatrice scrambled forward, her hands waving frantically. "This is a lie," she screamed, her voice cracking. "She hacked those documents. She is just a bitter, jealous widow trying to destroy her brother. Do not listen to her." I shook my head slowly, leveling a cold, merciless stare at my mother. "You knew, Mother. You both knew exactly what he was doing, and you chose to enable him anyway. You allowed him to bleed you dry because admitting his failure meant admitting your perfect family narrative was an absolute, total lie. But the worst part is what you deliberately, cruelly sacrificed. The truly unforgivable part is what you sacrificed to keep his pathetic illusion alive." I signaled the audiovisual booth one final time. The screen went completely dark, plunging the stage into stark, dramatic shadows. A crisp, clean audio file began to play through the massive concert speakers surrounding the ballroom. The acoustics of the expensive sound system made the voices crystal clear. It was the recording I had captured weeks ago during our tense confrontation at the country club dining room. The unmistakable, arrogant voice of Beatrice Montgomery echoed perfectly through the silent, shocked ballroom, striking everybody profoundly here today. "Of course we had to abandon her," the recorded voice of Beatrice sneered, dripping with callous, cruel indifference. "Do you have any idea how much money Preston needed today? He needed money to keep his companies afloat. We could not waste our liquid capital saving Vanessa and those two screaming infant twins. Let them freeze for all I care. Preston is the future of this family. Vanessa is just a burden. We cut her off so Preston could survive. It was the only logical choice." The audio recording clicked off, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its terrible wake now. The reality of her own toxic words hung over the ballroom like a thick, poisonous cloud. The elite members of society, the philanthropists, the politicians, the wealthy socialites, they were all staring at Beatrice with absolute unmasked disgust. The physical revulsion in the room was palpable. Beatrice raised her hands to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically across the sea of judgmental faces. She looked at her friends, her peers, her fellow board members everywhere in the vast crowded room now. Women she had dined with and plotted with for decades were now turning their faces away completely utterly disgusted. They were shaking their heads in profound revulsion. The social ruin was instantaneous and absolute. She was no longer the respected matriarch of a powerful dynasty. She was a monster who had left her fatherless grandchildren to freeze just to fund her son illegal gambling and fraud. "I did not mean it like that," Beatrice stammered, taking a weak, trembling step toward the edge of the stage. "You are taking my words out of context. Please, you must understand." But nobody was listening to her pathetic excuses. The journalists in the room were typing furiously, their phones capturing everything completely. They were capturing every single second of the Montgomery family total annihilation. The carefully constructed fortress of their reputation had been completely obliterated, turned to ash by their own greedy, toxic actions. Harrison stumbled back to the mahogany podium, gripping it tightly. He gripped it like a dying man. He looked out at the room, his life work destroyed, his legacy turned into a cruel, humiliating joke. He was a ruined man, stripped of his power and his dignity. Preston stood frozen, completely isolated on the massive stage. He had no money, he had no property, he had absolutely nothing. He had no family protection left to hide behind. His crimes were broadcast to the entire city, and his victims were finally seeing the absolute truth. I looked down at George and Helen, who were watching me with fierce, proud tears in their eyes. I had done it. I had protected my real family and destroyed the monsters who had tried to bury us. I lowered the microphone, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over my entire body. I turned my back on the pathetic remnants of the Montgomery family, preparing to finally end this toxic nightmare forever tonight. I was absolutely ready to walk down the stage stairs and join the people who truly loved me unconditionally. But the spectacular evening was not quite over yet. A sudden heavy movement at the back of the massive ballroom caught my immediate attention. The crowd parted nervously like the Red Sea, stepping aside to avoid the cold, dangerous energy radiating from the back exit entirely. The two massive underworld creditors, wearing their cheap gray suits and carrying the heavy weight of unregulated debt, had finally seen enough. They stood up from their tables and began walking purposefully toward the stage. The story of Vanessa's ultimate triumph over the Montgomery Empire teaches us a profound and uncompromising lesson about loyalty, self-worth, and the true definition of family. Society often pressures us to forgive the unforgivable simply because the perpetrators share our DNA. We are continually conditioned to believe that blood ties demand endless sacrifices, even when those very ties are actively bleeding us dry. However, the reality is starkly different. True family is not an accident of genetics. It is forged through action, choice, and unconditional support during our darkest hours. When Vanessa was left to freeze with her infant twins, her biological parents and brother offered nothing but a closed door and a measly $200. It was George and Helen, strangers bound by compassion rather than blood, who provided the sanctuary and love she desperately needed. Furthermore, this narrative highlights that the most devastating revenge against toxic abusers is not violence, but absolute, unshakable success. By securing her financial independence, Vanessa stripped her abusers of their only weapon, control. She did not allow their cruel narrative to define her future. Instead, she let their own greed and fraudulent actions orchestrate their spectacular downfall, proving that those who build their lives on manipulation will eventually collapse under the weight of their own lies. You are never obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic family members warm. Your worth is defined strictly by your resilience, your character, and the family you actively choose to build around you. Share your own journey of reclaiming your power and walking away from toxic relatives in the comments below. If this story of sweet absolute justice resonated with you, please hit the like and subscribe buttons to join a community that celebrates resilience and true independence.